Welcome everyone to podcast on PhD. This is the second episode, and we have today Abhishek Shankaraman, who is a fellow PhD student with me. He is a fifth year PhD student working in the network theory. So Abhishek, tell me more about yourself.
Hi, Swadhin. Thank you for inviting me here. So my name is Abhishek, and I'm part of the ECE department, and I work mostly in uh, networks, broadly defined. We're both started off working with wireless, but now slowly also considering problems in machine learning, which have a significant network structure. But yeah, before coming here, I was from India. I grew up in Bangalore and went to undergrad in Chennai, and I moved immediately to my PhD after undergrad. So yeah, I mean, it's,
Okay. So, like, you moved immediately to do your PhD. Did you know what is the PhD about, or do you want to be a professor or anything, or or is it the seniors are doing it? You follow the thing,
Mhm.
and or if you just dig deep, did you have this kind of thinking in childhood, like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that? So, just any thoughts?
No, actually. So the decision to do a PhD was very late, I should say. So I was like, okay, if you go all the way back, so in childhood, I was just interested in, I think, mathematics and physics primarily, which growing up in India, one ends up in engineering if somebody's interested in that. I think if I think back and if I'd grown up in the US, I would definitely not have picked up an engineering degree in undergrad. Okay, so that being said, I started studying electrical engineering in undergraduate, and I think for the first 3 years, I was this was not even a thought that entered my head. Because mostly at that level you're not really exposed to anything seriously exciting, and somehow the curriculum is as is, and then you go along in life. And then in fact I was actually if I think back, in college I was very peer pressured, you should say, into like trying to get into management consulting, the banks, and all uh, the what at least at that time I thought, or what everybody around me thought, are the most coolest things for a career to do, which is very foolish now in hindsight. And in fact, I did compete very severely for getting into positions like this, and I didn't make it, and I was very depressed one day, and I still remember that. And then later on, I somehow got an internship at IBM Research Lab, uh, because I didn't get into Deutsche Bank or Goldman Sachs or one of the things, I don't remember now. And then, yeah, this was at the end of my fourth year of undergrad, which is the first time I got exposed to research a little bit. We wrote a small paper at the end of the internship, which is not great, but at least it got me contemplating about things. And then I came back to start my dual degree project with my advisor, who happened to give me a very very meaty thing. I didn't do much, but at least I read a lot, and then it became very clear that it was not still very clear, but it was very evident that this is something that I want to pursue for a longer period of time. But I still did apply for jobs. I got a few jobs on campus. I, in fact, visited the companies uh, where I thought I would go join, and then 2 days there and two Skype calls later at UT, I decided no. I would at that point I still remember my reasoning. I would not regret not taking up the job, but I would definitely regret not pursuing whatever I thought was the itch then further. So yeah, it's a very late decision.
Okay, two more kind of follow-up question. I just want to ask very extreme thing. First thing, you said that you kind of in the childhood you started doing mathematics or physics. So is this like what I find that people in India assume that you should do good in mathematics or physics. So is was it a very natural interest, or who kind of introduced to it you introduced this to you? And lastly, you said peer pressure. So are you not feeling that peer pressure while at PhD? about publishing, about going to some job which is so-called prestigious, or like to kind of matching up to that, or is it your inner calling, or truly you believe that that's your inner calling?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part first. So, no, I was introduced at something that I always tell my parents very often it comes up. I was actually introduced to uh, science and mathematics, the real science and mathematics, I think very, very late. It was at the age of when I was in 11th standard. And the reason I got introduced was I still remember the story. So I grew up in Bangalore, and Bangalore in 2005 is very different from 2017. For example, preparing for competitive exams or math or Olympiads was absolutely not a thing there. Like you would one out of every 20 kids would do it, and most likely your peer group wouldn't. So somehow surprisingly, I had one friend who happened to have an extra application for a particular coaching center and things like that. So I gave that exam, and to my surprise did very well. And then once I went there is when I was actually exposed to uh, what I thought was real science and real mathematics, which from day one was captivating. There's no question about that. And yeah, so no, it was not forced because uh, like both my parents and like the peer group around me and my family at that point of time in that area in Bangalore, somehow this was not a part of stories you heard growing up. Okay, now so that at that time there's no peer pressure, and at that time I still believe it was just fortunate that I seemed to like it, and there were really good people at my coaching class who were like former professors who made you enjoy what they teach. Yeah, sure, you have peer pressure exists at all point of time. True, it exists heavily now. I would assume so, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. It is good because you need to once in a while also consider it's sort of a signal from the outside world saying that something could be really interesting and worth looking into. uh, so I wouldn't assume it's not so much a pressure. It's more like just don't just be aware that if you're falling into a confirmation bias, just be aware of it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I don't mind. Which is why I considered even back then trying really seriously contemplating a management consulting career. And the peer pressure these days is to have a paper at NIPS or ICML or something like that, which is, I mean, I think it'll exist. I don't know whether I'm succumbing to that or not. I don't know.
Okay, very honest answer. Like just change a gear. I just want to know what is the like single most or like two or three things you want to share with general audience, or like audience which are not part of your research area. Which are the problems people work on in your research area and which might be interest to others?
Okay, so one of the things that I must admit is I don't still have my research area yet because I think I worked on three different problems, or let's say roughly, and all three were from different communities, and all three papers were targeted different audience. So, okay, so that is the end of my research area. So, but for someone in the outside, I would say my research area is very theoretical. So, especially for a practicing engineers, many of the time the results or even the developments may not immediately seem impactful. But time and again, not at least the results in my field have established that fundamental research ideas always not they're not always useful, but on in they have sort of a power law effect. Almost all thing there are a very few rare examples which have which have had practical impacts, but the moment they have, it's super significant. Like I think the famous results are, I don't know, the power of two choices, which was studied purely as an academic interest at some point, and then once the cloud computing took off, that became the de facto way to do things. And okay, that's just an example, but yeah. So yeah, from the outside, it's really a question of taste, and if you really find it interesting from the outside, then that's a huge signal. I would say you should really pursue it because it's beautiful.
Okay. Fundamental research are like very interesting. So let's ask you some personal question. For example, you are a grad student, and we have very highs and lows. So how do you kind of manage those highs and lows, and do you have like very high or very low point of your life, and how do you kind of manage your everyday work life balance?
Yeah, so that was part of the. So that was. So yes, of course, I do have highs and lows, and in particular, I think they have been pronounced. Probably, I would say, just because of my lack of experience in life in general. I started grad school fairly young at 23. So of course, the view world at 22, sitting in the comfort of familiarity as opposed to going a PhD, that bubble is going to burst and that's going to cause lows. So I think one strategy that has worked for me consistently is to be disciplined. Is to you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, but you should train your. I At least for me, I realized that I should train myself to produce or do work independent of what my mood is, whether I'm feeling good, whether I'm feeling bad, which has two things. Don't overwork when you're feeling extremely good and motivated, and not work at all when you're feeling low. Has helped me to keep to some extent insulate my day-to-day moods from producing long-term things. So it's basically like having some sort of routine, I would say, or discipline.
Okay, you are a routine person. Um, okay, so you have published many papers in top places. Like, can you talk about a backstory of a paper and how you go about process of writing a paper? How do you create the ideas, or you think you ideas to work on, and from that to like the publication process? How does it work for you? Or yeah.
Okay, so that has varied over the years. I think in my first year, I worked or wrote a paper which, in hindsight, is very. It was a very okay. So the way all my projects have conceived, or like me and my advisor have thought of something as, oh, it would be nice if this was done, and that seed of an idea, some you many such discussions happen, but one such thing particularly takes your fancy. You start thinking about it, and then so the majority of the effort is in my research field is actually converting that vague English statement into a precise mathematical formulation whose solution would be of interest. So this is very counterintuitive. People would think that solving the problem is what will take the most time, but in my field, it's actually not. It's actually asking the right questions in the right way is where it needs real creativity, and this is where I take it took the most time. In fact, some of the papers took me close to an year from to actually arrive at what should be the problem to solve, and then it takes you 2 3 months to solve, and that's almost like a tough homework problem rather than real research. So almost all my papers have proceeded that way, where my advisor suggests sort of something vague in English, and then or rather, I think probably he would have done it faster, but it took me a lot of back and forth to uh, at close to a year to arrive at what should be the correct thing. And in the process of doing so, you keep on writing. So my only way, in theory, you proceed is you have to keep on writing. You keep on. They won't end up being papers, but they'll become your notes, which will run. I don't know, about 100 pages every project, which will be every idea or every thought you had and your reasoning for that. That won't be a paper, that'll be your notes, and then once you have your problem, you go ahead and you solve it, and then the solution will be, I don't know, half a page maybe, if you're very good, or if you're sloppy writing, maybe at most 2 pages. And then the writing the paper is another 3 4 months in my field again, because most often the way you found the problem and the solution will not be the right way in which you explain it to others, and finding that is the most difficult part, which I still am learning about writing. And yeah, it improves with experience, but yeah, it's a slightly different, I think, from systems way people do.
Like, can you give a simple, concrete example in a very simple way? You give the overarching feature of finding a good problem takes time and writing paper. Give a like not going into very detail, but a concrete example. Okay, we thought about this problem, we looked at in this way, but suddenly this is not interesting or this was solved. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll give so there's a paper we wrote on community detection on spatial random graphs. So the way that problem originated was my advisor gave a talk in Princeton, I guess, and another faculty on something very unrelated, but on something to do with Euclidean geometry, the math department, and then another person there asked him, okay, can you adapt community detection to spatial random graphs? And he came and told me that, and that somehow caught my fancy because it was community detection was in the air, everybody was talking about it, and and then but the real difficulty in formulating this question here in the setup is twofold. Like uh, for some technical reason, the graph has to be infinite because that makes some of your analysis easy, although your algorithm will eventually work on some finite restriction. But then there's no way to naturally define the problem on an infinite graph. But if you define the way, if you just copied the definition from what people had done on a finite restriction, then the problem looks so ugly that it was intractable. So we spent like more than 3 months in actually figuring out what would be the correct way to pose it on the infinite graph directly. It was a lot of effort, and finally, I think we drew some inspiration from some other sort of talk that happened in the math department, statistical physics, where people do in something very removed from computer science, and then we saw, oh, maybe we could do a definition like that. Then we put that definition in. It still looked very unnatural. We got few interesting results, but the problem as such was not yet publishable, even though we had a solution, because it was in a bit technical and unnatural. Then the final piece of the puzzle on this problem was solved when I gave my proposal talk with just this unnatural piece, and then it turned out that we had made a very minor technical mistake, which is not serious, it is fixable. But then in the process of trying to fix it, eventually we saw a way of connecting what we had done in a setting that computer scientists would like it, and then that's when we went up and wrote up the paper. But this was an extreme example, but even for me, it was very illuminating. Like at least at the way when we began the project, I had no idea that this would be the final form of the problem.
Very nice story. And hopefully every of your project have this kind of very interesting story. So another problem we face as a researcher is the rejection, paper
Hmm.
rejected. Did you get any of your paper rejected, or is there any paper rejected multiple times? How do you deal with this kind of situation? And yeah.
Yes, speaking of rejection, I just got one of my favorite papers like rejected second time just a few hours from now. uh, yeah, of course. I mean, in computer science, unfortunately, being conferences being selective is rejections is common. I think like initially I would have been very devastated, but now over the years, have after having attended certain conferences, I think I've realized that one shouldn't take both acceptance and rejections personally, because I think paper gets accepted is most likely because you were lucky, and paper got rejected is most likely you're unlucky rather than something to do with talent. Uh, but that being said, like I think rejections always suck. Uh, Rejections suck, especially when if the reviewers have either not put in the effort and not understood it, and then quickly found some way to reject it without putting in the effort. And I think that is the big unfortunate part I see in computer science, where there's just no way to enforce reviewer quality, or there's no rebuttals, unlike in typical EE journals where you can have a discussion quickly, and then the reviewer realizes he has not made an effort. Yeah, so now I realize that most papers I'm if so initially in my first few years, the first few papers I wrote, I just hoped that they would get accepted because I didn't want to work on them anymore. They were kind of something I wanted to get rid of. But now towards the end, like I only try and write papers that I would still be interested to think about and stick, even if I submit and after a few months it gets rejected. So that's a way of coping. So if you like some topic enough, then I think you will find a way. And if you believe it is good, someone somewhere it'll get accepted. And I'm hoping so because this is one of my favorite results, and I think this is the second time it's getting rejected at Sigmatrix.
So following up that on question, so there are currently what I find there are three processes in publication. One is conference, one is journal, as you're saying, and another is this conference journal hybrid model, where you
Mm.
submit and there is rebuttal over phases, and if it get accepted within time, it went into the conference and it also went into the journal. Sigmetrics is following this, and I know there is UBComp is also following this. So, what kind of process you believe in, or or the current research process is okay, or do you think something else need to be done? Specifically, what I find in systems, the reproducibility is a big problem, but I don't know what about theory. So you can talk about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't like I don't like only journals or only conferences. The reason being only journals is good. You get a lot of time with reviewers to correct your mistakes, but there's no meeting. You don't get to see other researchers and talk to them and meet them. So in that way, conference wins hands down for me. But the conference acceptance procedure is like it's typically one shot with very low bar on quality review. So in that view, I think what Sigmetrics is doing is I think they're going in the right direction. At least, you have multiple chances to submit. You can submit longer versions. There's no page limit restriction, and then there's actually a conference where you meet people. Yeah, so I hope like, and for me, for research that I do, reproducibility is not so much of an issue. At best, I'll have to share code which contains simulations which are typically small, one Jupyter notebook or something like that, and you're done. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think sitcom is a huge, it's a huge, that's a research question in itself, I must say.
No, I was curious. Like I was reading some field medalists was talking like for mathematics itself, there are like the mathematics is so esoteric or something. There are very few experts in that field. That there can be some kind of error creeping in. And is there no for like for crypto there are like 88-page paper. If you go for like 100 pages paper, so how do you make sure every lemma and every definition and every proof you are doing, yeah, are actually correct? Uh,
Right. Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, at least for me personally, I'm a grad student in ECE, so I'm assuming I'm not doing such esoteric math that they won't be able to find reviewers. I am fairly confident that, yeah, I mean, I can find at least 100 reviewers for my paper, and but that is gives. Having said that, that is true because. Yeah, you're not. That is something that you and your advisor need to sort it out before you publish. Uh, so this is sometimes when we go to ECE conferences, it's an well said joke. The proof is only between you and your advisor. To everyone else outside, including the conference members, they just need to know there exists a proof rather than what is the proof of whatever you're claiming. So yeah, we are not mathematicians in the sense we are not like selling proofs as a final product. So in that way, we don't have that much of a problem in ECE. But that's a big problem, which is one of the reasons why papers that propose new, at least in my field, that propose new techniques take longer time to get published.
okay, just changing gear again. Do you have any future career choice, and why? What is the reason behind it? And when did you come up with that? Okay, I want to do this.
No, I don't have a choice yet, but I'm still want to be in research line because I think. research is a worthwhile endeavor in the sense I believe that as a community, as we need to do it, we need to keep the discussion up on uh, being very rigorous about generating knowledge. And this is something that I only came up very towards the close of my PhD again, because given lack of experience, this is not something that I had. This did not form automatically, but I mean, I'm still a student and I have no concrete plans yet.
Okay. Any big long-term goal? Do you have like 20 years, 30 years down the line? You want to do something? It does not need to be very aligned what you are doing. What I'm asking, if you wished for, okay, if I have done this or if I would have done this, it would have been better. I think it needs to be changed. So anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a vague answer for this. So the style of my research, although I sit in engineering, is the following: you posit that you say, if the world behaves like this, then my paper holds. And then if my paper holds, I don't know, some company can make a lot of money by doing this, or you can implement this to change that. So, but it's still very open loop in the sense that that is where my research ends. That's where traditionally my interaction with the next pipeline of the people who need to use this knowledge ends. At least in my career, I want to completely be involved in, not if not as a primary member, at least see a closing the loop of sorts. Like start look at a problem, uh, okay, work hard on producing something theoretically sound. At the same time, also ensure that uh, it gets passed along down the downstream, and then you come back and it might give you new theory questions to work at. And unfortunately, my internships didn't give that, and that's something that I'm yearning to do later on.
And I'm not necessarily asking about the research, like any political, social problems you want to think of. It's not that what research and how you are expert in, but
Mhm.
any socially, like you want to do something about climate change, but maybe you don't have the resource or anything. You might not do anything, but
Mhm.
people kind of think about, I want to create a school or something. So it does not necessarily need to be aligned with your research, but any if you have any, if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, no, but I think of all the issues, I think I feel strongly mostly for education in the sense, if at all I have the opportunity and energy to contribute, I think I would want to contribute in education, because I think I truly believe that knowledge is the path to freedom, like personal and as a society. And if if at all I can be involved in any endeavor of this sort, that would be an amazing.
Okay, great. um, so you are from India, and so you are working here, you want to do research. So anytime you want to go back to your country, do you become homesick, or like anything sort of like in that frame, or want to be researcher going back India, or be here, or
Uh, mm, of course, so your question had two parts. So about homesick part, yes, of course, I mean, there is this no way around it. You feel homesick, but over the years, I've come to like this part. So in fact, I reserve sort of Sunday afternoons or Sunday evenings just to feel homesick and just to reminisce of myself of India. And I usually, I don't know, used to watch like Tamil movies, and which I don't usually watch. Just and I used to feel bad now, but now it's become sort of a routine that I look forward to and actually enjoy doing it. So that is one way I found to cope with homesickness. And okay, so and your next part is plans to going back to India, or no, I'm not that keen to say to go back immediately to India. I want to. I feel like for me personally, I can learn more here at the moment, and uh, And yeah, and at this point in time, I'm optimizing to learn as much as I can about many things, and I feel this country, and thankfully, as a if if there's no real visa issues and things like that, is a great place to do that.
So you work in mostly theoretical field, and currently there is s- because of online connection so big. So do you feel you need to be physically present here to connect with the people you want to work with, because you already made some connections? And can you not go back? And I think India have few research institute may not be at that par like TIF or IISc in your hometown Bangalore, but they know may not be at par, but do you feel that you could do your theoretical work going back, not immediately but 5 years 10 years down the line, because you can create your own connections agenda over different communication channels?
Yeah, so 2 points to that. First, I don't want to be identified as a theoretical person. I want to be just more or less identified as theoretically inclined. So, which means I'm still, after my PhD, I might look for more opportunities to do other things. To answer your second point, I've realized over the years that physical environment matters tremendously to especially to scholarly endeavors like research. Sure, you can connect with people on Skype, on YouTube, and things like that, but uh, being physically present is and having I don't know you having the 10-minute spontaneous conversation with another colleague who works on something else but is let's say the expert in that field is is way more motivating. Those sort of random small directions when you integrate over time I think makes you more developed in thinking. So just for that physical environment is why is I mean sure online collaboration is great but I will only use it as a last resort. My prime like physical presence is the bigger is a big factor for me.
Okay. Do you have any advice for new graduate students, or one thing you would have known in your first year which might have helped in your research or saved your research in a better way?
uh, to new grad students. So, okay, if you're interested in theory, you should really spend the time in learning as much and taking as many advanced classes and trying to master them as you can, not necessarily whether it's your research area or not, for two things. One, it'll tell you whether you really like to do it, to pursue it, for to write a PhD thesis, or is it just like a wishful thinking. And two, as again, I believe like a body of knowledge is very important. That's what leads to wisdom eventually, which is what you need for your thesis. So I think I see a lot of first year students just completely ignoring learning in class, at least in my field, learning in classrooms to just get to doing research. But I found it the other way. Like the more class, I've done 20 classes in my PhD, even after having a master's. And sure, there were a lot of times distraction, but in the end, uh, they allowed me to slightly think about things in many ways, which makes the final product, at least for me, I would not have imagined this coming in with primarily just the first semester classes of my finished, say, research projects. And then that being said, like you should not take it too seriously. I think research is uh, you should not take it too personally. Research failures and a good metric of success is and another question I think which I realize people have not asked is very early on itself you should ask the following question. You should ask, do I want to be my advisor in life? If the answer to that is no, then I would suggest try finding another advisor, because that person is going to mold a lot of your thinking, and if you do not want to be like that person, uh, then find someone you want to be like, because you that is because if you have a sort of a discongruence eventually between who you want to be and who you're turning out to be, that might that I've seen causes some amount of dissatisfaction, even though everything seems fine on the outside.
But it is a classical explore and exploit problem. There is how do you kind of change advisors to know align? This is very difficult, I guess.
No, but yeah, that's true. But like, keep asking yourself that question from the very beginning. Don't not even ask this question. That's what I would say. The moment you ask it, you will. It is. You really have to. It is like a marriage, and you have to like really admire the other person, and then and most often it happens because like especially if you're young and they will. Uh, you will find something exciting, but this I'm talking from my field where you're primarily given an advisor before you come in. But I guess there are many people who come here, rotate, and then choose. So it probably maybe holds true for them.
So, any last thought, anything about this podcast or anything you want to share?
Yeah, so this podcast has been typically about just the research and work part. So yeah, I think you should be curious about life in general. I think it helps in keeping an open and broader view, and definitely you should make friends outside of your research group, and otherwise you'll be in an echo chamber and you won't know what's happening in the world. uh, and yeah, so it's like part of life, right? So you wake up and then 5 years of your life is done in getting a PhD. So you should not do things, other things in life that you really want to do, like which is for even for you, Swadhin, like this podcast is, sure, it's not helping you become publish another paper or something, but it's important and essential to do. So that's why I like this podcast, and I was happy to be on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Abhishek, for sharing your thoughts. I think whoever listens, I don't know, will help them in future. Thank you for coming here.
We